Imagine coming home to find your wife of 20 years in someone else's arms. My life fell apart in one night, and this is the story of how I lost everything I thought I knew. This isn't your typical love story, and what I found out will shock you. I never thought I'd be the type of guy to end up in this situation. 20 years of marriage, 2 whole decades of thinking we were strong, that what we had couldn't be broken. I met Karen at a college party back when we were both too young and too naive to really understand what love meant. I was studying law, and she was majoring in psychology. I was drawn to her immediately, her loud, carefree laughter, her wild blonde curls, and that playful spark in her eyes that hinted at something exciting. We got married right after we graduated. We were crazy in love, couldn't get enough of each other. The wedding was small, just family and close friends, held in this cozy little chapel by the ocean. Our honeymoon was in Spain, where we stayed up late drinking cheap wine and making love under the stars. Those early years were everything I'd hoped for, full of joy and promise. We built a life together, filled our home with laughter and warmth. I became a lawyer, working long hours and steadily moving up the ranks, while she pursued her passion as a school counselor, helping troubled teens. Karen loved what she did, always coming home with stories about kids whose lives she had impacted, and I was so proud of her. She had this unique way of connecting with people, of seeing them in ways I never could. But somewhere along the line, things started to shift. I can't pinpoint the exact moment, but I think it might have been when the kids left for college. The house suddenly felt too big, too quiet. Or maybe it was when I got even more wrapped up in work, trying to provide a lifestyle I thought we both wanted. Looking back now, the signs were there, the subtle changes that I missed. Karen started dressing differently, spending more time getting ready, staring into the mirror longer than usual. I'd catch her smiling at her phone, only for her to lock the screen the second she noticed me watching. She grew distant, distracted, even when we were supposed to be spending time together. At night, she'd turn away from me, saying she was too tired or didn't feel well. I tried to shake it off, telling myself I was just being paranoid. After all, we'd been married for 20 years, what could possibly be wrong? But then there were the moments I couldn't ignore. I'd come home and find she was out, with no explanation. Her stories started feeling a little too polished, like she was rehearsing them before telling me. I even overheard her on the phone a few times, talking in hushed tones, her voice filled with a kind of excitement I hadn't heard from her in years. I kept telling myself I was overthinking it, that it was all in my head. Then came the night she walked in late, faintly smelling like a cologne I didn't recognize. When I asked her about it, she just laughed it off, said she'd bumped into an old friend. That uneasy feeling settled in my gut, but I forced it down, too scared to face the idea that the woman I loved might be hiding something. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was losing her, that there was someone else drawing her away. I was terrified to ask her outright, afraid of what I might uncover, but I was also scared of doing nothing, of letting this distance between us grow until it was too big to close. So, I started paying more attention, watching her closely, noticing all the little things that didn't add up. I felt like a stranger in my own home, always on edge, always waiting for the moment when everything would finally unravel. It didn't take long before I started picking up on more of those little things, those subtle changes that now seem so obvious when I look back. Karen was always the kind of person who loved structure and routine. But out of nowhere, her schedule became erratic. She'd leave the house early, claiming she had a yoga class, or she'd come home late from work with vague excuses about staying to help a student in need. Sometimes, she'd mention meeting a friend for coffee or a drink, but she never said who these friends were, and I never saw any texts or calls that would confirm her plans. Our weekends together became rare. The date nights we used to enjoy were now infrequent, awkward affairs where she seemed disconnected, like her mind was miles away. I'd ask her about her day, about her students, or what she had planned for the weekend, but her replies were short and dismissive, as though my questions were a nuisance. Most nights, I found myself lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering where everything went wrong. I made an effort to bridge the growing gap between us. I planned a surprise getaway, hoping it would remind her of what we once had. She agreed to go, but during the entire trip, she was distracted, constantly checking her phone and slipping away to take calls. Her laughter sounded forced, hollow. At one point, I glanced at her screen and saw a message from someone named Mike. She quickly angled her phone away, muttering something about work. Mike. I didn't recall her mentioning anyone by that name. When I casually asked her who he was, she answered almost too quickly, just a coworker, waving it off like it was nothing. But there was a slight flicker in her eyes, a momentary pause, and I knew she wasn't telling the truth. That's when I began digging deeper. I combed through her social media, her emails, anything that might give me some answers. But she was careful, maybe too careful. There was nothing solid, just vague hints and cryptic messages that left me with more questions than answers. Then, one night, as I was drifting off, I heard her in the living room, talking quietly on the phone. Her voice was soft, intimate, in a way that made my stomach twist. I couldn't catch the words, but the tone was unmistakable. I waited for her to come back to bed, my heart pounding in my chest, but she stayed out there for over an hour. When she finally slipped back under the covers, she turned her back to me and pretended to sleep. What had once been doubt was now full-blown suspicion. And suspicion soon morphed into paranoia. I couldn't focus at work, my mind was always drifting back to her, to what she might be doing. I became obsessed, analyzing every word she said, every move she made, trying to uncover the truth. I kept a closer eye on her, noting when she left, when she came home, and who she interacted with. And then there were the late-night texts. She'd claimed she was getting a glass of water, but I knew better. I could hear the tapping of her fingers on her phone, see the faint glow from the screen illuminating the hallway. I felt like an idiot, lying there in the dark, pretending to sleep, all while my wife whispered secrets to someone else. One night, I found myself parked outside her office, sitting in my car. I needed to see if she was really working late like she said. An hour passed, then two. I finally saw her leave, her hair slightly messy, her smile brighter than I'd seen in years. And right behind her came a man, a tall guy with dark hair and a confident walk. He reached out and touched her back, and they both laughed together. She didn't see me as they walked to his car, her hand brushing his as they moved. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. A surge of anger swept over me, but I stayed still. I just sat there, watching them drive away, wondering how long this had been happening, how long she'd been lying to me. That's when I knew I had to dig deeper. I needed to figure out who this guy was and what he meant to her. I needed real proof, not just for my peace of mind, but for whatever was coming next. So, I started following her more closely, searching for answers in the hidden corners of our life. And there, sitting in my car with the windows fogged up from my own breath, I felt the first real crack in our marriage, and deep down, I knew things would never be the same again. The night everything fell apart started like any other. Karen had been quiet all day, lost in her own thoughts, her gaze distant. By noon, she was still in her bathrobe, standing by the window like she was waiting for something, or someone. I could tell she had a plan. I could feel it in the air, heavy and tense, like a storm ready to break. When she told me she was going out that evening, I didn't even bother to ask where. I just nodded, pretending to focus on a book I wasn't really reading. Her voice sounded casual, too casual, like she was trying to convince herself this was all normal, that there was nothing unusual about it. "I'm meeting up with some friends," she said, her tone light, almost breezy. "Just a girls' night out, you know, the usual." I nodded again, not trusting my own voice. My heart was racing, and I could barely focus. I watched her disappear into the bedroom, her steps quick, almost excited. After a while, she came out, dressed in a black dress I hadn't seen in years, the one that fit her just right, highlighting the curves I used to explore with care. Her makeup was flawless, and her hair was styled in loose waves that cascaded over her shoulders. She looked stunning, just like she used to when she got ready for our dates. And that's when she said it. Her words sliced through the air like a blade. I just need tonight to prove to myself that I'm still attractive to other men. I froze, the book slipping from my hands. I stared at her, trying to wrap my head around what she had just said. Her eyes locked onto mine, challenging me, daring me to respond, to say something. What? I managed to say, though my voice didn't even sound like my own. I'm going on a date tonight, she continued, her tone calm, unwavering. And if everything goes well, I'll be spending the night with him. For a few moments, the world seemed to go completely silent. I could hear my heart pounding in my ears, my breath coming in shallow gasps. It felt like someone had punched me in the gut, knocking all the air out of me. She stood there, not flinching, not looking away. Don't overreact, she said, as if this was all completely rational. There's not going to be any divorce. I just need to do this, and then everything will go back to normal. I stared at her, feeling a mix of disbelief and an anger that I hadn't known existed within me. She was dead serious. My wife, the woman I'd loved for 20 years, was standing there, telling me she was going to sleep with another man, and she expected me to just accept it, to act like nothing had changed, like this was some kind of phase she had to get through. Who is he? I demanded, my voice trembling, not from fear, but from the rage building up inside me like a storm about to break. Who's the guy? She smiled, a cold, distant smile that sent a chill through me. It doesn't matter who he is. It's just one night. I need this. I've been feeling lost, invisible, and I need to remind myself that I'm still desirable, that I still have something left. We've been married for so long, and I just need to do this, to feel like I'm still alive. My stomach twisted up in knots, and I felt like I was going to be sick. I wanted to yell, to scream, to tell her how completely crazy this all sounded, but the words wouldn't come. I just stood there, frozen in place, watching her gather her things. Her expression was so calm, almost peaceful, like she was just heading out to run a quick errand. You can't really mean this, I finally said, my voice barely a whisper, as if I was afraid speaking any louder would break what little remained of my world. I do, she answered, her tone leaving no room for argument. I need this, and I'm going through with it. Don't make a scene. Don't mess this up. When I come back, we'll talk. But tonight is mine. And with that, she turned and walked out the door, leaving me standing there, my world crashing down around me. The sound of her heels tapping against the floor echoed through the house, and then, nothing. Just this unbearable, suffocating silence. Panic surged inside me, a desperate feeling clawing at my chest. I couldn't just let her walk out like that, I couldn't let her go to him. I had to know who this man was. I had to see it for myself, the face of the guy who was taking my wife away from me. I grabbed my keys and rushed out the door, my heart racing. I followed her car from a distance, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. She drove to a part of town I didn't recognize, to a small, dimly lit restaurant that seemed like it belonged in a completely different world. She parked, got out of the car, and walked inside, her head held high, her every movement confident. And there he was, standing at the bar, waiting for her. Tall, dark-haired, with a smile that lit up the entire place. He reached out, took her hand, and pulled her in for a kiss, his hand resting possessively on her waist. Something snapped inside me, something primal and fierce, something I didn't even know I had in me. I wanted to burst in there, rip him away from her, yell, fight, make them feel the kind of pain I was drowning in. But I didn't. I stayed in my car, paralyzed, watching them from the dark. The cold, hard truth settled in. This wasn't just some meaningless fling. This was betrayal, plain and simple, and I knew, deep down, that nothing would ever be the same again. I sat there, hands trembling on the steering wheel, my heart pounding so violently I thought it might explode out of my chest. I couldn't take my eyes off them. Karen and this stranger were laughing, completely lost in their own little world. She was smiling, a smile I hadn't seen in years, a smile that used to be just for me. They looked so comfortable, like they'd done this 100 times before. I should have stormed in there. I should have confronted her, demanded answers. But I couldn't move. I was frozen in place, trapped by a mix of anger, disbelief, and crushing pain. I watched as they moved to a table in the corner, sitting far too close to each other. He leaned in, whispered something in her ear, and she threw her head back in laughter, the kind of laugh that felt like a knife twisting in my chest. Then, I felt my phone buzz in my pocket. I pulled it out and saw a text from Karen, "Don't wait up. I'll be late." The casual tone of her message, the sheer audacity of it, made my blood boil. She knew I was at home, sitting clueless and waiting, and she didn't even care. She'd already made her decision, and here I was, watching it all unfold like a fool. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know who this man was, what kind of spell he had cast over her. I got out of the car, my movements stiff, robotic, like I was wading through thick water. I walked toward the restaurant, my eyes locked on them. I was close enough now to see the way she gently touched his arm, the way he leaned in, their faces so close it made me sick to my core. As I reached the door, I hesitated, my hand hovering over the handle. Every instinct in me screamed to stop, to turn around, to walk away before this got even worse. But I'd come too far. I had to see it, had to feel the full weight of what was happening. I pushed the door open, the cheerful chime of the bell above mocking me with its brightness. I stepped inside, my eyes slowly adjusting to the dim light, and I could feel every set of eyes in the room turn toward me. The air seemed to shift, thick with tension, like everyone could sense what was about to unfold. Karen spotted me before I even had the chance to say a word. Her face drained of color, the smile she'd been wearing disappeared, replaced with something else. Panic. Guilt. Maybe even anger. She looked at me like I was the one out of line, like my very presence was the problem. "Brian," she said, her voice sharp, a mix of surprise and irritation. "What are you doing here?" I didn't answer her. My eyes were fixed on the man sitting across from her. He glanced up at me, completely calm, almost like he was amused, like he knew something I didn't, like he'd already won. My fists clenched at my sides, my whole body trembling with a rage I didn't even know I had. "Who the hell are you?" I demanded, my voice louder than I intended, drawing the attention of everyone else in the room. The man raised an eyebrow, leaned back in his chair, still wearing that infuriating smirk. "I'm Mike," he said, his tone polite, almost friendly. "I guess that makes you Brian." My heart sank. Mike. So this was the guy, the name I'd seen on her phone, the shadow that had been hanging over me for weeks. I wanted to hit him, to wipe that smug look off his face, but instead, I turned back to Karen, my eyes searching hers, desperate for some kind of explanation. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice cracking even though I was trying so hard to keep it steady. "Why are you here with him? How could you do this?" Karen sighed, running a hand through her hair, her expression turning cold, harder than I'd ever seen it. "I told you, Brian. I need this. I've spent 20 years being your wife, the good wife, the patient wife, and I need to feel something different. Something new. I'm not asking for your permission. I'm telling you what I need." Her words hit me like a punch straight to the gut. There was no regret in her voice, no apology, just a cold, blunt statement of what she wanted, and nothing else seemed to matter. I could feel the tears welling up in my eyes, the humiliation burning on my cheeks. Everyone was watching. I could hear their whispers behind me, stabbing me like knives. I wanted to shout, to drag her out of there, to make her realize what she was doing, how much she was destroying. But the words wouldn't come. I stood there, my mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. Mike leaned forward, the smirk fading, and for the first time, I saw something serious flash in his eyes. "Maybe this isn't the right place for this conversation," he said quietly, like he was the reasonable one, the one with all the answers. "Shut up," I snapped, my voice shaking. "You don't get to talk. You don't get to sit there and pretend this is normal, like you haven't done anything wrong." He didn't say anything after that, just leaned back and watched, his eyes darting between me and Karen, waiting to see what I'd do next. And then, without saying another word, I turned and walked out, the doors slamming behind me. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think straight. It felt like I was drowning, my chest tightening, my vision going blurry. I stumbled toward my car, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. As I drove away, the hot sting of tears blurred my vision. I had seen it with my own eyes, she didn't love me anymore. Maybe she never did. I didn't know how to fix it, didn't even know if I wanted to try. All I knew was that everything I thought I understood about my life had been ripped apart, and I had no clue how to piece it back together. The pain was a living thing, clawing at me from the inside, tearing me apart bit by bit. I wasn't sure how much more I could take. And deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. The drive home was a blur. The streetlights bled together, and the world outside the windshield felt like a movie I wasn't a part of. I could barely grip the steering wheel, my fingers numb, my palms slick with sweat. My mind kept spinning, replaying everything over and over, the look in her eyes, the casual way she said she needed another man, needed a night with him. It felt like I was trapped in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I don't know how long I sat in the driveway after I got home, staring blankly at the front door. The house was dark, the porch light casting a faint glow on the welcome mat. Home sweet home. A bitter laugh escaped my lips. How many times had I walked through that door, believing in those words, thinking this was our safe place? Now it just felt like some cruel joke. I finally forced myself to get out of the car, each movement feeling like a battle. My hands shook as I fumbled with the keys and let myself inside. The silence was unbearable, the emptiness of the house crushing down on me. I tossed my keys on the counter and poured myself a drink, whiskey, straight. I needed something, anything, to dull the pain tearing me apart. I swallowed it all in one gulp, the burn in my throat a small relief from the ache in my chest. That anger surged through me again, hot and fierce, like a wildfire burning everything in its path. I grabbed my phone and opened her messages. I stared at the texts from Mike, their flirty exchanges that once seemed harmless. Now, they were toxic, poisoning every memory I had of our life together. Without thinking, I dialed her number. It rang once, twice, then her voice came on, sweet and cheerful. "Hey, you've reached Karen. Sorry, I can't come to the phone right now." I hung up before the message could finish, throwing the phone across the room. It hit the wall with a loud crack and fell to the floor. The tears came again, hot and furious. How could she do this? How could she betray me so completely and then just walk away? Was this who she had been all along? Had I been blind, a fool, all these years? I poured another drink, my hands shaking so badly I spilled half of it on the counter. I didn't care. I needed the numbness, needed the alcohol to quiet the storm in my mind. I sank onto the couch, staring at the darkened TV screen, feeling the room spin around me. I wanted to break everything, smash it all, make the outside world reflect the chaos inside my head. And then, through the fog of anger and whiskey, a darker thought crept in, something more primal. I needed to know more. I had to understand how long this had been going on. I couldn't just let it end like this, with her walking out of my life as if it meant nothing. I needed answers. I grabbed my laptop and opened her social media accounts. She hadn't been posting much recently, but I scrolled back through the months, searching for any trace, any hint of him. There were pictures from parties, work events, weekend trips, every single one of them looked so innocent. But now, every smile, every glance seemed poisoned, a lie waiting to be uncovered. At first, I found nothing. Nothing that really stood out. Then I spotted a comment thread on a photo from a few months back, Karen at some charity event, wearing that same black dress. And there he was. Mike. Just a name in the comments, but his words were flirtatious, too familiar. My heart pounded as I clicked on his profile, scrolling through his pictures. There were dozens of them. I had to admit, he was a good-looking guy, dark hair, sharp eyes, always dressed well, and grinning like he owned the world. Then I saw them, pictures of Karen. Not the type that would immediately raise suspicion, but there was something in the way they looked at each other, a closeness that made my skin crawl. There were group shots, bars, dinners, a few candid photos of them laughing, standing far too close for comfort. One caption read, "Great night out with the best crew," but all I could focus on was the two of them, side by side, her hand casually resting on his shoulder. It felt like the ground had fallen out from under me. How had I missed this? How had I been so blind? I stared at the screen, each picture landing like a punch to the gut, each smile twisting the knife deeper. Something dark and heavy settled in my chest, a loss so deep it nearly took my breath away. I spent the rest of the night on that couch, spiraling into a black hole of thoughts. My mind raced through every possibility, every memory, every moment that now felt like a lie. The whiskey bottle sat empty on the table, but the numbness I craved never came. I tried to remember the last time we were truly happy, the last time I felt like I was the center of her world. Had it all been a front? Had our marriage been nothing more than a comfortable arrangement until she found something better, something more exciting? I glanced at the clock. 3 a.m. Still no sign of her. My eyelids were heavy, but I knew sleep wouldn't come, not tonight, maybe not for a long time. My mind was trapped, picturing her out there with him, in his arms, in his bed. I could almost hear their laughter, their whispers in the dark. And that's when it hit me, this wasn't just some fling. This was a wound, deep and raw, that would never fully heal. I was furious, shattered, and lost. And no matter how hard I tried to deny it, I knew I was standing at the edge of something I couldn't come back from, something that would change me forever. But the worst part? I knew she wasn't coming home tonight. And maybe, just maybe, she never would. The hours dragged on, and the house stayed empty. I sat in the dark, my head heavy from too many drinks, my body slumped into the couch like gravity was trying to pull me through the floor. The quiet was unbearable, filled with a low buzz in my ears that matched the storm raging inside my head. I kept glancing at the door, half expecting her to walk in at any moment, to offer some kind of explanation that would make sense of all this madness. But the door didn't open. I don't know how many times I checked my phone, hoping for a message, something to prove she was still out there. I wanted to see her name light up the screen, to hear her voice, even if it was just to say she was leaving for good. But there was nothing. Just the silence, thick, suffocating silence. The hours felt like days, and as the night dragged on, panic began to creep in. What if she didn't come back at all? What if this was it? I grabbed my phone again, scrolling through our text history from the past few months. Her replies were short, often delayed. It hadn't hit me before, but now it felt painfully obvious. My thumb hovered over her name. I wanted to call her, to hear her voice, but deep down, I was terrified of what I might hear on the other end of the line. I opened the messages again, rereading her last text, "Don't wait up. I'll be late." Those words seemed to mock me, dancing across the screen like a cruel taunt. I tossed the phone onto the coffee table, feeling my frustration deepen, its sharp edges cutting into me. I needed to do something, anything. Sitting there, drowning in my own thoughts, wasn't helping. I got up and started pacing the room, my mind a chaotic mess of anger, fear, and something else I couldn't quite pin down. It felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, staring into a dark void I never imagined could exist in our marriage. I needed air. Space. Something to clear my head. I grabbed my jacket and headed for the door, stepping out into the cold night. The street was still, the neighborhood asleep. I walked without direction, my feet moving on their own while my mind tried to make sense of everything. How had we ended up here? How had I missed the signs that now seemed so painfully clear? Every memory felt stained by betrayal, every shared moment now twisted by the knowledge of what she was doing right then. I couldn't stop imagining them, her and Mike, in some hotel room, or maybe his place, wrapped around each other like no one else existed. The thought made me sick, my stomach churning with jealousy and rage. I found myself standing outside a small park near our house. We used to come here, back when we were younger, before the kids, when everything was simple and easy. I sat on a bench, staring at the empty playground. The swings moved slightly in the breeze, their slow creak cutting through the silence. I pulled out my phone again, unable to resist. I typed out a message, then deleted it. Typed another, erased that too. I couldn't figure out the right words. I wasn't even sure what I wanted to say. Did I want to beg her to come back? Did I want to scream at her for tearing us apart? I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the call button, my heart pounding. I pressed it. The phone rang once, twice, then went straight to voicemail. I swallowed hard, my throat dry, my voice shaky as I left a message. Karen, it's me. I don't know what to say. I don't understand what's happening or why you're doing this. I need to talk to you. Please, call me back. Just, come home. Please. I hung up, feeling a strange mix of relief and regret. I didn't know if I'd said the right thing, if there even was a right thing to say. I sat there, hoping she would call me back, but as the minutes dragged into hours, there was nothing. Just that same unbearable silence. My anger flared again. I wanted to do something, to take control, to stop feeling so powerless. I even thought about going back to that restaurant, finding her, dragging her out, and demanding answers. But deep down, I knew it would only make things worse. So, I stayed there on that cold bench, staring out at the empty street, feeling more alone than I ever had in my entire life. I thought about all the years we'd spent together, the life we'd built, the love we shared. And I wondered, had it all been a lie? Had she ever truly loved me, or had I just been a placeholder until something better came along? As the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, I finally stood up, my body stiff and aching from the cold. I walked back to the house, feeling like a ghost haunting the remnants of my own life. I unlocked the door and stepped inside, the familiar scent of our home wrapping around me like a cruel reminder of what I had lost. And there, sitting on the kitchen counter, was her wedding ring. I stared at it, my breath catching in my throat, my heart pounding in my chest. It was the final confirmation, the last piece of the puzzle I had been trying so hard to put together. She hadn't even bothered to take it with her. She'd left it behind, discarded, like a token of a life she no longer wanted. I sank to the floor, the cold tiles pressing against my skin, and finally let the tears come. They were hot and bitter, a mix of rage and heartbreak. I cried until there was nothing left, until the tears dried up and all that remained was a hollow emptiness. In that moment, I knew I had lost her. She had made her choice, and it wasn't me. I don't know how long I sat there on the cold kitchen floor, staring at her wedding ring. Time felt like it stretched and blurred, moments blending into each other. I felt numb, hollowed out by a pain so deep, I wasn't sure if it would ever fade. My thoughts circled endlessly, chasing each other like wolves, relentless and unyielding. Eventually, I forced myself to get up, every movement slow and painful. I picked up the ring, its cold weight resting in my palm. I couldn't believe it. This small band of gold had once represented everything we were, everything we promised to be. Now, it felt dead, heavy with all the things we'd lost. I slipped it into my pocket, feeling its weight against my thigh, a constant reminder of what she had left behind. I wandered through the house, aimless, lost. Her clothes still hung in the closet, her perfume lingered faintly in the air. The framed photos on the walls seemed to mock me, frozen moments of happiness that now felt like they belonged to someone else. I stopped in front of one from our 10th anniversary. It was taken on a beach, the two of us with our arms wrapped around each other, smiling at the camera like we had all the time in the world. I wanted to smash it. I wanted to break that picture into a million pieces, to destroy every trace of the love we had once shared, the life we had built. But I couldn't do it. I just stood there, fists clenched at my sides, staring at those smiling faces. Before I knew it, I found myself in the bedroom, the bed still unmade from the morning before. Her side was rumpled, the sheets thrown back carelessly, like she'd left in a rush. I sat down on the edge, the mattress sinking under my weight. My hand traced the fabric, imagining her lying there, her hair splayed out on the pillow, her body warm and close beside me. I could still smell her shampoo, a faint scent of lavender and honey that always clung to her hair. A wave of anger surged through me, followed by an even stronger wave of despair. I wanted to scream, to yell, to let it all out, but instead, I just sat there with my head in my hands, feeling the crushing weight of it all. I needed to do something. I needed answers, something to pull me out of this suffocating grief. I grabbed my phone, my hands shaking as I scrolled through my contacts. I found Jessica, Sandra's close friend, the one she always went out with, the one she trusted with everything. I hit the call button, my heart pounding as the phone rang. After 2 rings, Jessica answered, her voice bright and cheerful. "Hey, Brian. What's up?" I swallowed hard, trying to steady my voice. "Jess, I need to ask you something about Karen." There was a pause on the other end, just a second too long, before she replied. "Oh, sure. What's going on?" "She's not here," I said, my voice breaking. "She left last night, and she hasn't come back. Do you know where she is? Have you heard from her?" Another pause, this one longer. I could almost hear the gears turning in her mind, could sense her weighing her words, deciding how much to reveal. "Brian, I'm not sure where she is right now. She mentioned maybe staying with a friend, maybe needing some time to think things over." I clenched my jaw, frustration boiling up inside me. "Jess, don't give me that. I know what's going on. I saw her. With him. With Mike." Jessica let out a sigh, and I could hear the tension in her voice. "Look, Brian, I really don't want to get in the middle of this. I'm sorry you found out this way, but Karen, she's been unhappy for a while now. She's felt lost, trapped even. I don't think she knows what she really wants anymore." Her words cut deeper than any knife, twisting something inside me. "And you knew? You knew she was seeing him, and you didn't say anything?" There was a pause, her hesitation palpable. "I'm her friend, Brian. I tried to talk to her, to help her figure things out, but she made her choice. She told me she needed time to find herself again, to feel something she hadn't felt in years." I closed my eyes, feeling the room spin around me. "Do you know where she is now?" Jessica's voice softened, almost apologetic. "No, I don't. She mentioned needing space, and I haven't heard from her since yesterday." "I'm sorry, Brian. I really am." I nodded, though she couldn't see me. "Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Jess." I hung up the phone, feeling more lost than ever. I had been hoping for answers, for some kind of clarity, but instead, I was left with even more questions, more doubts. It felt like I was sinking, being dragged down into a darkness I couldn't escape. I didn't know what to do next, where to turn. I considered calling her parents, maybe reaching out to other friends, but what would I even say? How could I explain that my wife of 2 decades had just walked out, and I had no idea where she was? I sank back down on the edge of the bed, feeling the tears burn at the corners of my eyes again. I wanted to hate her for what she'd done, for the betrayal. But all I felt was a deep, overwhelming sadness, a sense of loss so profound it threatened to swallow me whole. And then I heard it, the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. I froze, my heart leaping into my throat. I sat there, listening, straining to hear the footsteps approaching the front door. The knob turned, the door creaked open, and then there she was. Karen stepped inside, her face pale, eyes red and swollen, her hair disheveled. She looked exhausted, like the night had drained every last ounce of strength from her. Her eyes met mine, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence was thick and unbearable, hanging in the air like a fog. She opened her mouth to say something, but I raised my hand, stopping her. "Don't," I said, my voice low, trembling with emotion. "Don't say anything. Just tell me why. Why did you do this? Why him?" She looked down at the floor, her shoulders sagging, and for a second, I thought she might break down and cry. But when she raised her head again, her eyes were cold, determined. "I did it because I needed to feel something, Brian. I needed to know that I was still alive, that I could still be desired, be wanted. I did it because I've been dying inside, and I didn't know how to tell you." Her words hit me like a sledgehammer. I felt the air leave my lungs, the room spinning as her confession sunk in. I wanted to scream at her, tell her how selfish, how cruel she had been. But I couldn't. The words wouldn't come. All I could do was stand there, staring at her as my heart shattered all over again. She took a step closer, her eyes pleading. "Brian, I'm sorry. I never wanted to hurt you. I didn't know what else to do." I shook my head, my hands balling into fists. "I don't understand, Karen. None of this makes sense to me. You were my wife. We had a life together. How could you just throw it all away for this?" She didn't respond, just stood there with tears streaming down her face, her expression a mix of regret and defiance. In that moment, I realized there were no answers that could make this better, no words that could erase the pain. I turned away, unable to look at her any longer, feeling the weight of her betrayal crushing me from the inside out. I had no idea what came next, no idea how to fix this, or if it could even be fixed. All I knew was that nothing would ever be the same again. Karen didn't say anything more. She just stood there, her breath coming in short, shaky bursts, as if she was afraid to speak, afraid to push me any further. I felt like I was teetering on the edge of a cliff, the ground crumbling beneath me, threatening to pull me down into a void. I wanted to run, to get away from her, from this house, from everything we had built that now felt so unbearably fragile. "I don't know if I can forgive you," I finally said, my voice breaking, sounding small and distant even to my own ears. "I don't know if I even want to." She flinched, as if I had slapped her. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," she whispered. "I don't deserve it. I need you to understand why." "Why?" I let out a bitter laugh, the sound harsh and hollow. "You think there's a reason that could make this okay? That could make this any less of a betrayal?" She shook her head, tears still falling down her cheeks. "No, I know there isn't. But I felt so lost, Brian. For so long, I've felt like I'm fading, like I'm just existing. I needed to feel alive again. I didn't plan for this to happen with Mike, it just did." A surge of anger shot through me, hot and fierce. "You needed to feel alive, so you decided to kill everything we had. Everything we built together." Karen's face crumpled, and for a moment, I thought she might collapse right there in front of me. "I know I've hurt you," she said softly. "I know I've destroyed something precious. But I swear, I never stopped loving you, Brian. Not for a second. I shook my head, feeling a sharp, cold pain twist in my chest. You don't do this to someone you love, I said, my voice trembling. You don't tear them apart just to make yourself feel better. She stepped closer, her hands reaching out to touch me, but I pulled away, the anger flaring up again, forcing her back. Don't, I warned, my voice low and raw. Don't come near me. She froze, her hands dropping to her sides, her eyes wide with pain. Brian, please. I'm still your wife. I'm still the woman you married. No, I snapped, my voice turning into a low growl. You're not. That woman is gone. You threw her away for what? A night with some guy who made you feel good? You betrayed me, Karen. You betrayed us. She opened her mouth to speak, but I cut her off. I don't want to hear it, I said. I don't want to hear any more excuses. I need space. I need time to think. Her eyes widened, and I saw panic flicker across her face. Brian, don't. Don't leave. Please. We can figure this out. We can find a way. I turned away, shaking my head. I don't know if there's anything left to figure out, I muttered. You made your choice. Now I need to make mine. I heard her soft sobs behind me, felt the weight of her pain in the air, but I kept walking. I needed to get out, to breathe, to escape the suffocating weight of her betrayal. I grabbed my keys off the counter, my movements rushed and frantic, like I was afraid she might try to stop me. Brian, she sobbed, her voice choked with tears. Please don't go. Please. I paused, my hand gripping the doorknob, my heart feeling like it was being torn in two. Part of me wanted to turn around, to hold her, to promise that we could somehow find a way through this. But the other part, the part that was hurt, angry, betrayed, couldn't bear the thought of being near her right now. I just need some time, I whispered, my voice barely audible. I don't know how long. I need to get away from here. She didn't say anything more, just stood there, her face crumpled with grief, her hands trembling at her sides. I turned the knob and stepped out into the cool morning air, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on my shoulders. I climbed into my car, gripping the steering wheel tightly, my breath coming in shallow, uneven gasps. I looked back at the house we had bought together, filled with memories of better times. The place that had once felt like a sanctuary now felt like a prison, echoing with the pain of her betrayal. I didn't know where I was going, didn't have a destination in mind. I just needed to get away, to put some distance between myself and the pain that was tearing me apart. I started the engine and drove, my eyes fixed on the road ahead, my mind spinning with 1,000 thoughts, each one more painful than the last. I drove for hours, watching the scenery change around me as I left the city behind and headed into the quiet countryside. I felt like a ghost, drifting aimlessly through my own life, untethered and lost. I didn't know what I was looking for, if there was even anything out there that could help me find a way back to something that resembled normalcy. Eventually, I pulled over at a small motel on the edge of a sleepy town, its neon sign flickering dimly in the fading light. I parked and sat in the car for a moment, staring at the rundown building, feeling the emptiness inside me growing deeper. I didn't want to go in, didn't want to face the reality of everything that had happened. But I knew I couldn't keep driving forever. I checked in, the clerk barely glancing up from his phone as he handed me a room key. The room itself was small, with a faint smell of mildew, the bedspread worn and faded from years of use. I collapsed onto the bed, staring up at the cracked ceiling, feeling the full weight of it all settle over me like a suffocating blanket. I pulled out my phone and looked at her name in my contacts, my thumb hovering over the call button. I wanted to hear her voice, to ask her why again, to try and make sense of all the madness. But I couldn't bring myself to press it. I knew hearing her voice would only make things worse, would only deepen the wound that was already bleeding out inside me. Instead, I set the phone down and closed my eyes, trying to block out the images flashing through my mind, Karen and Mike, their bodies close, their lips meeting in a kiss that should have been mine. The tears came again, hot and relentless, and I didn't bother trying to stop them. I cried until there was nothing left, until exhaustion finally took over, and I drifted into a restless, dreamless sleep. And in that darkness, I felt the cold emptiness of loss, the harsh reality of what I'd lost. I wondered if I would ever find my way back from this, if there was any way to heal from a betrayal that ran this deep. As the night dragged on, I realized I didn't know the answer. Not yet. Not now. And maybe not ever. The next morning, I woke up in that small, musty motel room with a crushing weight in my chest. The sunlight filtered through the thin curtains, casting pale, dusty rays across the worn carpet. For a moment, I felt disoriented, unsure of where I was or how I had even ended up here. Then, like a punch to the gut, everything came rushing back, the betrayal, the rage, the helplessness that had driven me to this place. I stared up at the ceiling, my mind still heavy with the pain from the night before. I had no answers, no plan, no idea what to do next. My head throbbed with a dull ache, a combination of too much whiskey and too little sleep. I sat up slowly, feeling the stiffness in my limbs, and glanced at the clock. It was almost noon. Without thinking, I reached for my phone and saw several missed calls and texts from Karen. I hesitated before opening them. Her messages were desperate, pleading. "Brian, please. I need to talk to you. I'm so sorry. I don't know what to do. Please come home. Please, just answer me. I can't lose you." A wave of emotions hit me, anger, sadness, longing. I didn't know if I wanted to scream at her, hold her, or just disappear completely. I couldn't keep living in this limbo, couldn't carry the weight of this pain without doing something, anything. I needed closure. I needed to confront her, to face her and see if there was anything left of us, if there was anything left to save. That's when I made up my mind. I grabbed my keys, threw a few bills on the motel counter, and headed out. The drive back felt longer than the night before, the road stretching out endlessly in front of me. With every mile, I felt the tension build, knowing what waited for me. My heart pounded in my chest, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. I wasn't sure what I would say, or even what I wanted to hear, but I knew I had to face her. When I pulled into the driveway, the sight of our house, our home, made my stomach twist in knots. I sat in the car for a moment, staring at the front door, now feeling like a barrier between the life I once had and whatever was left. I took a deep breath and finally got out, walking slowly toward the door. I opened it and stepped inside. Karen was sitting at the kitchen table, her face pale and drawn, her eyes red from crying. She looked up as I entered, and for a moment, we just stared at each other, the silence between us thick and suffocating. "Brian," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I didn't think you'd come back." I leaned against the door, needing the support. "I don't know why I did," I said, my voice cold and distant. "Maybe I'm looking for answers, or maybe I'm just looking for a way to say goodbye." Tears filled her eyes again as she stood up and took a step toward me. "Brian, please don't say that. I know I hurt you. I know I did something unforgivable, but I'm begging you to listen to me." I raised my hand, stopping her in her tracks. "I've done enough listening, Karen. For the last 20 years, I've listened, trusted, believed in you, and then you threw it all away." She shook her head, her hands trembling. "I didn't mean to, Brian. I swear, I didn't. I was lost. I was confused. I was so unhappy, and I didn't know how to fix it. I thought if I could feel something different, maybe I could find my way back to myself. But I was wrong." A bitter laugh escaped my lips. "Wrong? That's putting it lightly. You didn't just hurt me, Karen, you broke me. You shattered everything I thought I knew about us, about you. I loved you. I still do, but I don't know if I can ever trust you again. She reached out, her hand brushing against my arm, her touch warm and familiar. Please, Brian. Let's try. Let's go to counseling. Let's talk. I'll do anything to make this right. Just don't leave me. Don't give up on us. I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time in a while, I saw the fear in her eyes, the regret, the desperate hope. I saw the woman I had fallen in love with all those years ago, the woman who had been my partner, my friend, my everything. And at the same time, I saw the stranger she had become, the one who had betrayed me in the deepest, most personal way. I don't know if I can, I said softly, my voice cracking under the weight of those words. I don't know if I can forgive you for this. I don't know if I can ever forget what you did. Her face crumpled, and she sank to her knees, sobbing. Please, Brian. I love you. I don't want to lose you. I can't lose you. A tear slipped down my cheek, hot and painful. I don't want to lose you either, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. But I already have. The moment you chose him over me, over us, you lost me. And I don't know if I can ever find my way back to you. She reached out again, her fingers barely touching mine, her touch so light it was almost pleading. Please, she whispered. Give me a chance. Give us a chance. I looked at her, the woman who had been my wife for 20 years, the woman who had been my whole world. I felt the weight of her betrayal, the sting of her words, the pain of what she had done. I wanted to hold her, to tell her we could fix this, that love could overcome anything. But deep down, I wasn't sure it could. I pulled my hand away, taking a step back as the tears stung my eyes. I need time, I said, my voice strained. I need time to figure out if there's anything left worth saving. She nodded slowly, her sobs quieting, her shoulders slumping in defeat. I'll wait, she whispered, her voice broken. I'll wait as long as it takes. I turned and walked out of the house, my heart heavy, my mind spinning. I didn't know where I was going, didn't know what the future held for me. All I knew was that I needed to find myself again, to heal from this wound, to figure out if I could ever forgive her. I didn't look back as I walked away, the door closing softly behind me, the sound echoing like a final chapter being written. I didn't know if I would ever return, didn't know if I could rebuild what had been destroyed. But for now, I knew I needed to be alone, to find my own way forward, to decide who I was without her. And as I stepped into the sunlight, I felt an unexpected sense of relief, a weight lifting from my shoulders. Maybe, just maybe, there was a future for me out there, beyond the pain, beyond the betrayal. A future where I could find peace again, even if it wasn't with her.